we just like saw like this thing of light, and then it kind of just like like flashed, and then it like disappeared. Did you see that? My name is Mike Lucci. I am an investigator with the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective. I am a investigator with the BFRO, and I'm host of a show on the Untold Radio Network called the Bigfoot Journal. Um, I guess I've always been fascinated with Bigfoot, anything ghost, anything high strangeness, just when I was young growing up. And I think I really started focusing on the whole Bigfoot phenomena. Kind of how I guess kind of how like a lot of people got into it. I started watching the Finding Bigfoot show, and at first I was very kind of like mad, dismissive about it. I thought if the whole Bigfoot phenomena was an actual thing, it was just relegated to certain parts of North America, like the Northwest, I guess Florida, Ohio, places like that. But the more I watched the show, there were just certain details that got brought up, or certain theories or points where I'm just kind of like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. Like maybe this might have some legs to it. So I just started doing my own research, and I wound up going on a few BFRO expeditions, wound up meeting up with some other independent groups, investigators, and I kind of just took it from there. And now like it's in the beginning I my involvement was pretty intermittent, kind of like on and off for the first few years, but then once the CERC came along and got involved with them, that was around 2020-ish. I got involved with them, and that's kind of when I started doing research, investigating on a more like consistent, dedicated basis that I am now. So here I am.
Well, it's a journey that many have made from just seeing something like on television and then finding their way into the woods and actually doing, boots on the ground kind of research like you're doing now. So, is there a certain area that you try to stay within to do the research?
So I live in southern New York State. I'm actually in a pretty populated area. So I live in Westchester County. It's for context, it's pretty much the county that's like right above New York City. Not like Manhattan, like the Bronx. Like I'm like 10, 15 minutes away from the Bronx. So anywhere I have to travel for like good research, I have to travel. Like the closest area to me is probably about 50 minutes to an hour or so. Usually I'll go anywhere. I'll pretty much go anywhere. I guess I don't really have like a specific place that I call like my main research area, just because, the distance factor. I guess the closest answer I could give, the places, the areas I've probably spent the most time researching, though, have probably been probably the Catskills. I've been all over Pennsylvania, Central PA, Western PA. Those are the two places where I've actually gotten some of my most compelling potential evidence. A lot of like really interesting audio. And I've spent a good amount of time in southern Vermont, actually, over the last year and a half. Southern Vermont, southwestern Vermont, it actually has a pretty well documented history of potential Bigfoot related activity, high strangeness in general.
Hi, I'm Linda Eastburn of Linda Eastburn YouTube channel, and I have a new book out called Threshold to Encounters. It's about 40 years of research and experience with all of these wild cryptids that many of you I know have encountered yourself. You can find it on Amazon.com.
And
You live close to some areas that are really heavily populated. If you think about the cities that are on the East Coast, how close into those large, huge cities do you think Bigfoot actually manages to get to and live and inhabit?
they're like, certain travel routes that allow them to get through an area undetected. That might help them out. I'd say though, like if they get anywhere like remotely close, it's probably like once in a blue, like nowadays it's probably like once in a blue moon. Maybe back in the day, it could have happened a little more often. I'm talking like hypothetically here. I have like me personally though, I have actually interviewed a few witnesses who claim they've had, possible encounters in Westchester County, my county up in like northern Westchester. Because in Westchester, the more north you go, it gets, a little more like rural, rustic. And but a lot of these encounters happen in the last like 15, 20 years or so. So I guess nowadays it probably happens extremely rarely, if at all. Maybe like back in the day when it was less developed, less populated. There's
Yeah.
probably like better, there's probably like a better chance of it happening.
Back to Westchester County. That area, I know a few people I have interviewed from New York State have had some really interesting evidence. What have you found in that New York State area as far as evidence goes?
As far as potential evidence in New York State, I personally haven't found too much firsthand. I've just heard a lot of like firsthand, secondhand like accounts and stories and things like that. Believe it or not, the majority from my research, the majority of like reports or like witness encounters I've collected from a lot of like the like the hot spots in New York State have only mostly been like class B's and things like that. Actual class A encounters are pretty far in between. I
Sure.
actually you know,
What about those old accounts in Westchester County, those 20 years ago or so? What do you know the details on those?
yeah, so one of them, so it was actually one gentleman I interviewed, and they all happened back in 2000. They all happened back in 2003, and it was around a time. It was like a January 2003 when they happened, all during the winter, and there were about I'd say about two, three-ish, and yeah, like two, three-ish weird experiences he had kind of like around his property. He lived near a reservoir, like a New York City watershed reservoir. So it's a pretty, it's residential, but it's pretty heavily wooded, the area, and it's obviously protected by the agency, so you don't see too much foot traffic. But one of them, he said he heard like something big and loud, something big screaming and kind of like pacing frantically back and forth near his backyard, in his backyard, and he took me to the house. And the way the backyard was set up was, it had like a flat area right when you come out of the house, and then there's like this hill, and then it kind of flattened out to like this ridge line. It wasn't like, too tall, but there was like a path that kind of ran across all the houses back there. And he said he heard something, just like frantically screaming and just walking back and forth along that ridge line. And it was like a freakishly cold night. I think one of like the coldest nights we had on record. That's how he described it. And at one point, he said like he told me he like went outside to his front porch and just kind of like creeped around to look and see if he could see whatever it was. And he claimed that like a rock slammed the side of his house like about a foot and a half away from where he peeked around. And then after that, whatever was, making all that noise, screamed again, ran across that ridge line and down this embankment. And he said he kind of heard it running down the hill, and then a few minutes later, he heard those same screams coming from across the reservoir. Now, mind you, it was, super cold out. It was like well below 0 degrees when this happened. So the entire lake was like frozen solid. So he thinks whoever it was ran down that embankment across the reservoir, and just, that's how it got to the other side so quickly. And then another time, I think it was about a year or so later, or around the same time, he was making so he was like making music, and he was kind of like leaning yeah, he was kind of like leaning against his car, taking a bit of a break, and he heard something. He felt like he was being watched, I think, and kind of from like this darkened area, he heard something kind of like, when you hear like footfalls, like something's about to rush towards you. Well, he heard that, and he said he kind of like ran into his garage, almost like dove in and slapped the button or had like the remote thing to close it. And as he got up and turned to look back, he said that he kind of expected something to be there looking at him, or chasing him, but when he looked, there was nothing there. And then I think there was a third time, I think it was maybe a few weeks later, maybe like another year or so later, where he was just coming up his driveway. I think it was same thing. He was up late at night, working on some music he was editing, and he just said like he heard something big in the dark, kind of just like run across his front yard. And that kind of freaked him out. And then he told me a secondhand account where he showed me, he took me to like that back, he took me in the back of his house, kind of showed me the wooded area. It was like, there's like that ridge where he said he heard the thing moving. And then on the other side, there was like this embankment, at least like the swampy area. He took me further down. There were some wooded areas. There were a bunch of like the areas are much more developed. He said like back in the day though, it wasn't nearly as developed as it was at that time. But he told me there was one family he knew. They had like this one uncle or something like that who used to hunt in that area. And he said, I think it was around like the 80s or 90s, he claimed he had like an actual visual sighting of a squatch in that area back, like 80s and 90s where it was much more rural, like a little more secluded in that area.
So
And then
the first time that he heard those frantic screams, and apparently they're pretty loud and kind of got his attention for sure. Does he have any idea why this, provided it was a Bigfoot? We don't know that for sure, of course, because he didn't have an actual physical sighting, but whatever it was, does he have any idea why it was so upset and screaming so radically?
from what I remember, he had like he didn't really specify. I think like the only thing that he was able to come up with. He thought maybe it was hurt or just, disgruntled over something for whatever reason. That was kind of like the best answer he was able to give me about that.
The reservoir that this thing ran off to, is that a wooded area all around that, or is it clear? Okay, so, but he doesn't have any idea kind of where it went around that or into what wooded area it actually took off and ended up at.
Yeah, no, yeah, not necessarily. So, I guess to give you some context, the entire reservoir, it's, surrounded by woods, and there's a couple of like, there's a couple of houses sprinkled in between. It's not like your typical residential area where you have houses like side by side. There's definitely a good amount of space in between each house. But the area where his house was, where all this happened, and the direction it ran, I physically, like, we physically went to that side of the reservoir, in the cars, and I kind of did some poking around on Google Earth. That side of this was it's probably the most like secluded side of the reservoir where that happened. And I looked on Google Earth. There's kind of sort of like a bit of a greenway that leads up to that part of the reservoir, and if you follow it, it's a little indirect, but it technically kind of sort of will kind of sort of take you to the Appalachian Trail eventually, which I know there's a lot of theories that Squatches use sections of the Appalachian Trail maybe to like travel through. So when I kind of found that out, he pointed that out. I thought, if this is actually what we all want it to be, like those details there, I think could, give the potential legitimacy of that report some credence. Like, it would make more sense how, maybe a creature like that could have been venturing up that area a little north more, maybe just kind of like lost its way or, veered away for whatever reason and wound up there. So that kind of, that kind of helped it make like a little more sense to me, especially back then, in 2003, where it wasn't nearly as like developed and populated as it would be today.
Do you know if anyone went and researched it like shortly after it happened to look for footprints or anything like that?
I don't believe so. The guy was pretty thorough about like his whole ordeal with the incident. He definitely tried to include as many details as possible. I definitely feel like that's something he probably would have mentioned. He did say around like 2014, 2015, he initially submitted a report about it. And he kind of like touched base with one investigator about it, but there really wasn't any follow-up. So he has reached out to he did reach out previously to other investigators about it, but he didn't really. But like that first time around, he didn't really have any follow-up about it. So
But someone related to him or someone he knew had had an encounter where they actually saw one there sometime before that, right? Like in the 80s and 90s, someone in that area saw a physical Bigfoot.
yes, that was what. Yeah, that was like one
Mhm.
of the. It was like a second, it was like a second third hand story that he relayed to me that he said he heard that happened to come around from that same area.
Yeah. Um, it sounds like there could have been something there, but now maybe they have moved on or something like that. There's no remarkable evidence to show that they're still in that vicinity, right?
Yeah, I would say so. In the last like 20, 30 years, the northern part of Westchester County alone has the population has boomed considerably. It's gotten a lot more developed. So I think nowadays the chances of anything like that coming anywhere even near that area is probably like next to zero at this point.
Sure. So, and all of the reports that you've taken in over the years, which ones have stood out to you the most?
Hmm. That's a really good question. Kind of kind of put me on the spot here.
You have to rely on memory there, don't you?
Yeah. Um, firsthand, firsthand. Yeah, the one out of Westchester was definitely interesting. Especially just because it was kind of like in my own backyard. I'd spoken to one witness who had one Class A up in the Catskills that was I thought was particularly interesting. She said that she was vacationing, she was in a cabin, kind of took like a mental health vacation. It was her and a coworker of hers. And it was kind of like late at night, and she stepped out to have like a cigarette, and she said she saw something, big and ape-like that kind of, that was standing like right right kind of like along like the edge of a creek. It was sitting like behind a hammock. She was so specific, and she gave me like the specific area where it happened and everything like that. She even like drew me some pictures, and she said she stared at it for a few seconds before it kind of like sauntered off. So that one definitely stood out. Ironically, just because of its simplicity, mainly just because just the way she described it, like it was very realistic with what I'd consider like quintessential Bigfoot behavior, kind of like realistically how these things are. So these things are supposed to act. So that was definitely one of them. I've never really taken any crazy reports about like squatches hopping out of portals or any like physical altercations or like near death type experiences or anything like that. I guess another one that I like talking about is this one wasn't relayed to me. It was just one I just happened to come across in one of like those random Facebook groups. This happened at a place called Acadia Wildlife Management Area in Western Rhode Island, kind of by the East Connecticut border. And it was just someone and their wife. They were driving through the area, and they said one of them, they said like what they described as a squatch burst out through the woods, and they kind of like they kind of like break their car last second and kind of like I guess like kind of hit it or maybe like tapped it, but they said the creature that they hit it kind of like slammed and dented the hood of its car when it like slammed against it and kind of like shot its arm down on it before it like sauntered off into the woods. I don't know. I also thought that one was particularly interesting too, especially considering my research. I'm a big like data guy. I just think, the more reports you get, the more data you collect, there's certain patterns that emerge that I think could potentially, boost your odds of maybe pinpointing where and when these things could happen, or you could use them to potentially have like your own encounter. But anyway, um, that was particularly interesting to me too, just because out of all the Class A sightings that, I've tallied, um, by far, like as far as like, the witnesses' whereabouts or what they were doing, people driving, having, road crossing sightings or being in the car, it's like the vast majority by like a mile of like for that certain category. So just because of that, that was another one too that particularly stood out for me. So
Did they happen to have any kind of DNA evidence or any kind of thing on the car? Did they even know to maybe collect anything?
yeah, I don't think they even knew to collect anything. They kind of just left it at that. They kind of just left it at that. Unfortunately, I don't think they were like were mindful enough to try and do anything like that.
Did it do significant damage? Did they get pictures of it or anything?
It was just a, yeah, it was just like a it was just like a first hand account. There weren't like any photos or anything like that. But they said, like they said like the hood of the car got dented pretty good. So
So they would have had to have had a pretty close look at the Sasquatch that hit the car if it was just right there in front of the automobile at that point, right?
yeah, I would imagine. I think I remember the description being it was, about 7, 8 feet. I think they said it was like, fully black. It was either black or brown, or maybe they said brownish black or something like that, but kind of somewhere on that color spectrum. It was about maybe like a paragraph or two in total. I remember, and it was just something I just like came across while I was just scrolling on Facebook. So
Sure. Yeah, I understand it wasn't your case, to look at, but those are rare. Those are rare. That kind of close encounter like that is unusual, especially in an automobile. They see them, but they're often, like you said, at a distance or just walking down the side of the road or across the road quickly, and not that close of an encounter or whatever. Yeah, for sure. So you've researched down in Vermont. Vermont is a very forested area, or at least the places I've been there. So what have you discovered in that vicinity?
yeah, so Vermont's interesting. The main area I've researched is southwestern Vermont, and it's actually a region. It has its own name. It's called the Bennington Triangle. So I'm sure you've heard of like the Bridgewater Triangle, places like that before.
Yes.
Yeah, so like the Bennington Triangle, like it's pretty much like the same thing. It's got like its three main points, and it's just kind of like an epicenter of just a ton of like high strangeness type phenomenon. So they've had, like you name it, they've had it. Bigfoot reports, UFOs, other, like hauntings, people disappearing, other, other weird cryptid type, creatures being spotted, and everything like that. Um, so that area, they have something called the Bennington Monster, and it's described kind of as like a reddish brownish Bigfoot-like creature. It's not relatively big. A lot of eyewitness accounts describe it as being between 5 and 6-ish feet tall. And the first documented report about it happened in like the 1830s. Supposedly there was like this horse-drawn carriage that was transporting some people, and I guess kind of it stopped at like this bridge that had gotten like washed out by a recent flood. And there's a couple of different versions of the story, but supposedly like the driver of the carriage came out, checked the area out, and found like and spotted these unusually big, like human shaped footprints. And then at some point around after he saw that, the carriage got like attacked by a large bipedal hair covered creature. Some versions say kind like, and like I said, there's a few different versions of the story. Some say that the creature just like burst out, screamed, made a few weird movements and ran back into the woods. Other accounts say it kind of like came up to the carriage and started shaking it. Other versions say that it actually like physically pushed over the carriage and everyone in it. I found there's a very well-known New York Times article from like 1879 about two hunters who claimed that they spotted a, wild man. And, the description was it was about 5 to 6 feet tall, reddish brown hair. It wasn't in the Bennington Triangle area. It was I think it was near this town in like northwest Massachusetts called North Adams, and which is literally like a stone's throw away from the Vermont border, from the southwestern Vermont border. So there's that newspaper clipping, and then I found another one from like 1888 where I think a few other hunters had a similar encounter, but I think this creature that this wild man they described, bipedal, hair covered, was a little taller. I think it was like 6 to 7 feet tall, and the fur color was different. I think it was either like brown or black or something like that. So there are those two. The most interesting story that for me that came out of that area that I've kind of been like obsessing with over the last like year and a half or so. In November 1943, the anniversary of this is actually coming up. There was a hunter named Carl Herrick, and he'd gone hunting, disappeared for a couple. went missing for a couple of days. They found his body, and they said they found it was described as, bear prints, quote, larger than a man's in the area. There's about 2 feet of snow on the ground. But when after they did the autopsy, they determined that he had been squeezed to death by a bear. They determined that if a bear had done this, it had to have been about 350 to 400 pounds, which is way much heavier than, the average kind of like average weight range of black bears, at least in the Northeast. So what I found one particularly interesting detail that was kind of like an eyebrow raiser for me in that report was the doctor who performed the autopsy. He said he believes that so they believe that this guy, he apparently had like a really good shot. They believe he saw whatever he shot, we'll call it a bear for now, shot it, downed it, because they found his rifle like leaning up against a tree. And they believe that after he did that, he walked up to it, I guess, to check it out, and the animal was still alive. So the doctor who performed the autopsy, he thinks at some point during the struggle, he Carl Herrick wound up like on his stomach, and he thinks that, the bear got on top of him, got its paws under his chest, and he described it as clasping its paws and kind of just like, squeezing him until he punctured his lung. I found a copy of Mr. Herrick's death certificate, and it said that was the cause of death, a punctured lung. He had like some scratch marks on his face and things like that, but he pretty much said that, that was the cause of death. Now, I'm not really like by any means a bear expert, but you think it's about the anatomy of like, bear paws and things like that. I don't think they're able to clasp their paws. Like that's kind of something I think like, maybe humans, some primates are able to do. I don't know if bears have that capability. So I always thought that, describing the footprints as being larger than a man's, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think black bear footprints are about the same size, maybe a little smaller on average than the average human print. And keep in mind back then too, in that part of Vermont, yeah, they had like wild man and cows and stuff like that. But I think this is way before the time when people realized, okay, all these wild man or hairy creatures. It was before people put two and two together that okay, these could all be like the same creature, the same Bigfoot or Sasquatch type creature that people are seeing all over the country. I think this is long before people made that realization. So it was those particular details that really caught my eye about that case that kind of prompted me just to like, investigate it as much as I have since I found out about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of any cases where a Bigfoot or even a bear has squeezed someone of that in that nature, but then not they bears usually eat people. Is this correct?
Yeah, so I did my due diligence on that. I did my due diligence, and I try to find as many documented cases in North America of bear deaths as possible. And pretty much every single one, it said, like the person's body was like torn up or mutilated. In a lot of cases too, the bears were found like near the body, kind of like, protecting their food source. Um, this Carl Herrick one was the only one where it just said, the guy was squeezed to death.
And just left.
Yeah. And
Wow,
just
that's
left.
amazing. And it took them several days to find his body, you said.
Yes, I forget the exact dates, but the date he went missing, they found his body like 3 days later. And like I can't take credit for, being the first person to that brought this case to light. It was actually a missing 411 case. Well, it's funny. I forget how I found out about it. I think just like going through like Reddit or Facebook or something like that, I found something about it and I did my research. I'm thinking to myself, wow, this seems like a missing 411 caliber case. So I wonder if I actually like, beat them to the punch about it. And then like in a missing 401 book that was published a few years ago, I saw them like briefly mention the case. I was like, son of a
Yeah, there it was. Yeah. Well, it's a remarkable case. I mean, not enough detail to say yes for sure that this was a Bigfoot that was in the area as well. Have you researched if are there any other reports in that area, even beyond that time frame, before or since, that would indicate that there might be a clan of Bigfoot, or that Bigfoot even might exist anywhere in that area?
Yeah, there have been, yeah, I've come across a couple, I found a few like other newspaper clippings kind of like in and around the area. I found one about another wild man sighting in Brattleboro. There was another one in like another Vermont town nearby that kind of fell in like that late 19th century, early 20th century range. And then if you look on like major databases, you'll find a couple of reports in those counties in, South Central, Southwest Vermont, and there's a couple of like other just like independent, like non like stories and accounts that are floating around out there that aren't really like indexed or documented in databases. I think the most recent ones I've come across were in like 2018 or 2019-ish, give or take a few years. The most recent ones, and I'd actually met up with one researcher. He's like an independent guy, kind of does his own thing. He showed me this one specific area in Green Mountain National Forest. That's the national forest that kind of like covers that part of Vermont. He told me he claims he had two Class A sightings, and he heard like one or two other accounts of people seeing some weird stuff, in that area. And that in that area, he had showed me as well. Um, there were two weird things. So there were two weird things that happened when I was there. The first one was it was Labor Day weekend, 2023. This guy was pretty hardcore. Like we'd park our cars and he'd just take me like down the tree, like a mile or two down the trail. We just go like, a mile or two off trail. He just found like some random spot. He knew the area really well. He just found like some random spot. He just, take me off trail. We were walking like, knee deep in water and like, the bogs and stuff like that. He took me to some pretty cool spots, but we were on one of the main trails and we found what looked like like a possible print, kind of had like that elongated shape, toes. The heel was kind of narrow. It was definitely on the small side too. So it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to rule out or determine if it might have been like, a human, a bear, or a squat, maybe like a potential Squatch one. Took picture, did my due diligence, took pictures of it from different angles, size comparison. But and I only found one, of course I only found one, unfortunately. And we looked, checked that whole area. But I guess that section of like dirt on the road was the only area good enough where I guess a print would come out. So that happened. The other interesting thing, this is the first of the two weirdest experiences. This is how I would describe these. The two weirdest experiences I've had while being out in the woods doing something Bigfoot related is how I would describe these. So this happened in like July 2023. I was with the same researcher, and we're at that area in Southwest Vermont. We were walking back to the cars, and it was around 2 in the afternoon, sunny day out, and we were kind of like going down like this just like straight away. So we were about maybe quarter mile away or so from the cars. So if I'm looking this way, to my right, there's like this embankment, and to my left, there's like the slope that goes down to like this creek that the trail was paralleling. So we were mid conversation, and I don't even think we were talking about anything like Bigfoot related at the time, but we were just mid conversation, and to our right, we just hear this loud like break, loud snap. It was kind of like a, like a tree limb cracking or falling or something like that. So we both stop and we both look at the direction it came from. Now he didn't see nothing, but I saw it was maybe like I probably like if I had blinked, I would have missed it. It was like fraction of a second. I just saw this large black, it was just like a large black shape or mass. Black, a little bit of brownish in it, but it was just like this large black blur, I guess you could say. And it just like darted up the embankment. That's all I saw. The only thing, was just its color and just, I was able to see it enough to like, identify like, it just separated itself from the rest of its surroundings. I couldn't see any like definite I couldn't see any like definitive shape. It had no defining qualities or anything like that. So, I can't say it was a squatch or, a bear or moose or whatever. I won't say what it was because just, I didn't see enough I didn't see enough details to be able to make that determination, but that was definitely weird, I think. And just I just remember just like how fast it moved. I mean, just based on like the lack of detail and just how quickly I saw it, for all I know, it could have even, just been like my eyes playing tricks on me. But I remember like it was probably about maybe 30 to 50 yards away from me. So it was behind like other like, trees and brush and stuff like that. I was able to make it out. But, yeah, that was like the first of, two of the weirdest things that happened to me while I was out in the woods doing something Bigfoot, Bigfoot related. It happened to happen like in that specific area in Southwest Vermont.
Exactly. And how did you respond to that? Was it like a scary experience or was it just something that was like, well, matter of fact?
Yeah, I think it was definitely very like matter of fact, just because like, I didn't know for sure exactly what I saw. Like I turned to the other gentleman I was with. I was like, "Did you see that?" He was like, "No, no, I didn't see anything." So I kind of told him what I saw. I'm like, "Yeah, I just saw something move out of the corner of my eye." And I because like there's like the trail, the embankment, there was like a little bit of like a ditch separating the two. So I kind of like hopped over and like I walked kind of towards it, pulled out my phone just to like get some footage of the area of where it happened. And I didn't go to like the exact spot, mainly just because, it was Vermont. I was worried, all right, what if this is like a bear or like a moose or something like that? I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to get tangled up with anything like that. But I was definitely I was definitely like excited, I guess you could say, just for like having something weird like that, just for something having weird like that happen to me, regardless of what it might or might not have been. But I didn't, yeah, I wasn't like scared. I wasn't like scared or anything like that. What I liked though was, especially because, even though like he didn't see anything, the fact that there was someone else with me at that time who, at least like heard that crash that prompted us to look that direction. It definitely makes me a little more comfortable, like telling that story to people because, I have someone who could at least like corroborate, yeah, that's at least like what we both heard, even though like, I saw what, like I briefly saw one thing. I guess I was just lucky. I was at the right, I was just at the right angle. And,
Exactly. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like there was some danger or anything like that?
not really offhand. I never, yeah, like anytime I've been out in the woods, I never really like had that crazy gut feeling like, like you're like you're in danger or, something bad's gonna happen to you if you keep doing this or you keep going to that, keep going to that certain area. That's actually I guess like the closest thing that I guess like the closest incident that's happened to me like that was it actually happened this past Memorial Day weekend. I was at Mammoth National Park in Kentucky, I think like central or western Kentucky, wherever it is in the state. And it was like late at night around noon, 1 a.m. I was actually with Toby, my co one of my co-hosts on the Bigfoot Journal. And we just met up with some people. They kind of wrapped up early, and me and Toby were like, "Yeah, I still want to like poke around." So we went back to this ramp. It was like this ramp at this river that cuts through the area. If I had like a Google Maps or something, I could like physically show you the exact area. So for context, let me just describe to you just like the layout. So you have the road that leads up to the ramp. And there's like this little like ferry thing that kind of like transports cars from one side of the ramp to the other. And so you have that road. So if you're facing that ramp, to the right of you, the ground like elevates and you have the parking area. And then to the right of you, there's a bit of a slope and it's just all woods that direction. I looked on Google Math and just like, just as the crow flies, there was like, from like one area to like the next road or building or whatever, there's like, a few miles of woods. And, that's just as like as like the crow flies. So, just want to give you some context about that. So, there's like this little pier near the parking lot area. So, me and Toby, we walked up, we had our thermals out, we're kind of just cruising the area. We saw a deer on one of them. We saw a deer on one of them, which was pretty cool. Mind you, it was kind of like foggy, a little muggy out, so we couldn't get too much. The thermals weren't showing us too much definition with like the terrain or anything like that. But it was still kind of like a pretty clearish night out ahead. It wasn't like too cloudy or anything like that. So we're hanging out at this pier. In case I didn't mention it before, it was around like 1-ish in the morning, I think, when we showed up. And we keep hearing like this split, like the splashing. It was coming from directly in front of us and then like a little further upriver. So we couldn't see like directly down below the riverbank because there's a lot of just like overgrowth, a lot of like brush and overgrowth that might have been blocking anything. Um, the way the way Toby described it, it kind of sounded like, like when you take like a step into when you first take like a step into like a pool or something like that, it kind of makes that like kerplunk sound. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of sounded like that. Um, yeah, it kind of sounded like that. Or just like, something just like dropping or like smacking the water or, smacking the water or whatever. So that was weird. Just, like a quick side note on that. The next day we returned to that area. We kind of went like a little downriver. We saw and like, there's like this bridge that crossed over like, like part of the river. We were just like shining our flashlights and I looked down. We saw this like probably the biggest beaver I've ever seen in my life. Like I know they could grow up to like I think 4 feet or something like that, but this thing was like freakishly like prehistorically large. And it, slapped its tail when we shine our lights on. I was trying to like pull up my phone to like get like a picture or video of it, dove under. So I think that's what that splashing sound, that's what we heard. It might have been like, beavers or something like that. Toby thinks they're beavers, but he also thinks he heard like, splashing sounds that were like, totally like very different from, the ones that the beavers might have been making. But I digress. So after we heard like these splashing sounds, Toby kind of did like a I guess you would call like an aggressive, provoking kind of like roar, kind of like a ah. Um, we of course, we didn't hear anything. So we just kind of kept on therming and everything like that. But about 15-20 minutes passed, and because we were making small talk throughout the entire time. And about 15-20 minutes passed, and I noticed, Toby was getting like suspiciously noticeably quiet. So I turned to him just kind of like to see if he was okay. And he looked at me, he's like, I think we should go. I'm like, why? What's wrong? Everything all right? He's like, I just have this feeling like if we keep staying here, like something bad's gonna happen. Like I think we should go. And just, a little bit of like backstory. I've known Toby for a few years now, there's a lot, there's a good amount on the whole Bigfoot topic that, we agree to disagree about. But he's not a very emotional individual. I think, he definitely knows a lot more about being out in the woods than I do, so he's a good person to have out in the woods. But I could tell just by looking at him, I heard it in his voice, I saw it in his face, in his eyes. He was scared. He was really, really like, he was shook. So I'm like, all right, dude, like if that's how you feel, then let's go back to the car, like we out, all right? If that's how you feel. So we get back into the car and we get back into Toby's truck. He's sitting in the driver's seat and I'm in the passenger seat. So, we're just like getting our gear organized before we head out. And I have my bag, between my legs, so I keep on looking at, I keep on like rummaging, organizing my bag, but I keep on looking back and forth at my bag and back at Toby. Whenever something happens to someone, whether they don't feel well or they might have like gotten hurt or something like that, like I'm aware about that stuff. So I'm constantly asking, like, are you okay? How you feeling? How you feeling? It's just something, it's just like something I do when situations like that happen. There was one instance though where he was kind of like leaning forward. He was kind of like leaning forward a little bit. So so like it was just one of those times where like I looked down at my bag, I looked back at him, I looked down. When I look at him, I saw it kind of like the section of window like between the back of his head and like his car seat. And I could have sworn for like that split second where I kind of just like looked and looked back down at my bag. I saw this, I saw what I thought looked like a vertical upright figure. It was like white, maybe whitish beige in color, kind of like moving up the ramp. And I kind of did like I kind of like froze for a second, like, and I did like a double take. Of course, when I look back, it was gone. Toby was pretty freaked out at that time. I could, he was shook pretty bad. So, I didn't want to say nothing. But at first, so he gets the car started. We're pulling out of the parking lot. He's putting in the campsite back in his GPS. As he was doing that, I'm like, look, since we're up and running, we're getting ready to head back. I don't want to say nothing at first, but like I kind of told him what I saw, and he kind of looks like horrified at me. He's like, around that same time, I thought I saw kind of like a silhouette in that same area in the corner of my eye as well. So, we kind of do like, oh, holy crap, that was weird, blah, blah, blah. But we're about to pull out, and I look at the boat ramp. We'd have been like poking around, we kind of like woke up to it before when we first got there, just to, like, check it out. But I noticed something the second time I looked. It kind of looked like something tracked like mud or dirt out from, like out from the water, out from the river up the boat ramp. And it was kind of like, like when you come in from like somewhere really muddy, like you like track, like you track the muddy prints throughout the house or something like that,
Yeah, sure.
kind of like that. So, we both look at it. I'm like, I tell him, I'm like, keep the car running, just stay here. I just want to go check that out. So I walked out, and as I'm walking up to it, I'm trying to think like, did we know like did we notice these, tracking like weird tracks, prints, whatever you want to call them? Were these here when I was trying to figure out like, were these here when we, were originally down there before? And it's I realized too, kind of like, the section of the ramp that was like underwater, it was covering like this layer of silt. That silt was, pretty much close to like the same color of, whatever I thought I might have seen that, that one time I was looking, like back in my bag, back in him that I thought was going up, that I thought was going up the ramp. Really, like, the colors are eerily close. When I looked down at like, what I thought like were these tracks though, they were like bone dry though. The impressions. So that for me like automatically disqualified them as, potentially being something that might have like came up from the river. I also thought too, if something had, came up from the river, I feel like we probably would have heard it, splooshing and splashing as it, like as it came up. So I kind of just like disregarded that at first. So we drove back. Toby, like, he was feeling so like the way he was feeling, it got to the point where like he actually stopped his car, and he's like, dude, like, I need you to drive the rest of the way back. I'm like, no problem. So we get back. It was like 3 a.m. by the time we got back. We both went to bed. The next morning, we're kind of sitting at the camp table. We're just kind of like recapping. I'm like, we gotta recap what happened last night. Like, how you feeling, bub? And he looks at me. He's like, dude, after you went to bed, I started like throwing up a bunch. And he looks at me. He goes, I think I might have gotten zapped. I don't, me personally, I don't. I never really like I don't really have much of an opinion on the whole zapping, zapping thing. I don't really never really did much research about the whole zapping thing. I don't really have much of an opinion on it. But I just listen to him. I'm like, hey, I suppose it's possible. Like everything that happened kind of like, fits that criteria, if the whole zapping thing, is an actual thing. Unfortunately it rained. It rained that next day. So like, those so-called impressions that I found leading up from the river had been washed away. But we returned later that day, and when I got to the ramp, I just realized how much that ramp was elevated from the parking lot from where we were, and I figured like if I'd actually seen something walking up that ramp, it had to have been at least like 10, 11 feet tall minimum. Um, I personally I personally think, like there's something to the whole like square cube theory or square cube law or whatever. I recently started like, doing like a deeper dive into that. So I personally don't think, like if Bigfoot, if Squatches are real, I personally don't think they get that big, 10, 11 feet. But we poked around the area. So that other side of that, the other side of that road that led up to, the boat ramp, that embankment, we were poking around there. Toby found a game trail that led from out of the woods alongside, and kind of just like paralleled that side of the ramp. So we decided to do we decided to do like a reenactment. It was like close to dusk. It was getting pretty dark, but I rounded the corner and I kind of just like followed that boat ramp. Toby was at the same spot in his truck, with his Mini, and he was, like the same spot we were that night. He was recording me. Um, I barely kind of saw myself in that reenactment, but where I was, like the proximity of where I was compared to like the proximity of where I would have seen that figure, it would have made more sense to me where like if I'd actually seen something that night, that figure, it most likely probably could have been following that game trail instead of like, going up that ramp. So definitely like a big crazy back and forth about what we experienced that night and like what we might or might not have seen. But to bring things full circle though, like that was, it didn't happen to me directly, but that was kind of like the closest thing that happened to me first, like firsthand that I experienced personally, when you ask like if I ever personally experienced a situation where I thought I was in like imminent danger or anything like that.
Well, it sounds like quite an experience through the night. Have you ever seen any of the orbs or things like that that people talk about seeing in the wooded area?
Actually, believe it or not, I have. I actually have two interesting stories about that. The first one happened, well, the most recent one happened over a year ago. I was on I was on a Bigfoot related investigation. We were in like we were in like northeastern PA, and we were all kind of just like like spread out on this fire, kind of like on like this like fire road, and we were kind of like it was kind of like declining. So my group was kind of like right here, so we had like a pretty good view, and we just looked like into the woods, and we kind of saw it was kind of just like we just like saw like this like thing of light, and then it kind of just like like flashed, and then it like disappeared, almost kind of like how like a kind of like a star or something like that. And that direction, we checked. There were no roads, no houses, no nothing like that. So we don't think it could have been like car lights or a plane or anything like that, especially the angle that we saw it. So that was interesting. The first time, the first time I saw something like that I wasn't even doing like nothing Bigfoot related. This happened in 2009. I was 19 years old around October. And this actually happened in Western New York because, I had gone to college in Buffalo. So me and three of my friends, we went to this play. Me and three of my friends, we checked out the cemetery called Gutelberg Cemetery. It's in South Wales, New York, and it's supposed to be like super, super haunted. It's like the cemetery is so old it has like Revolutionary War veterans and Civil War veterans both buried there. So the way the way it's set up is like, you have your road, and then you kind of have like a bit of like an incline, and then it like plateaus out, flattens out, and that's where the cemetery is. So, you have like, the headstones and things like that, a few trees, but then there's this huge clearing for like, a few hundred yards until, there's like another tree line. So, we're there late at night and we're kind of just like poking around, but we all kind of like, there were three of us. There were three of us. Our one other friend stayed in the car. And my one friend, and so, we were staring, we were just staring out into the field, and we saw kind of what looked like this. It kind of looked like kind of like someone like waving like a lantern, but it was like, like this whitish, beigeish, yellowish maybe light. It just like, slowly appeared and disappeared. And we were all like, okay, that was weird. What the F was that? And then a few seconds later, we saw it reappear again. Only this time it was much closer. And I'm like, okay, this is getting kind of weird. And then we saw it appear and reappear a third time, much closer. And then at that point, we're all just like, all right, this is getting freaky. We're just gonna bounce. So, we kind of like ran back to the car. We're a little, a little freaked out. But yeah, those are the two orb related stories, or orb light related stories, whatever you want to call them, that I have.
Did it seem like an intelligence with the orb, or did it seem like just a random light floating around?
It's kind of hard to say. Like that specific instance in 2009, if I had to answer, just the way that like it kept on appearing and reappearing, like it kind of almost like the same sequence. Like even like the same direction where it appeared and reappeared, how it moved all three times. There's definitely some form of like symmetry to it. So I guess with that detail in mind, if it wasn't natural, I'd say there's a good chance there might have been, maybe some degree of like intelligence to it, whether it was something directly or maybe something, manipulating it, or something like that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. But you haven't taken any reports where people have had any kind of unusual experiences like the orbs, the lights, and Bigfoot disappearing and appearing. I hear those sometimes from people I interview.
Yeah, like me personally, not really. Like when it comes to like the whole Bigfoot phenomenon, I'm a huge flesh and blood guy. I haven't like I haven't really paid too much mind to any like, to like the woo stuff, or any, the woo stuff or anything like that. There's actually a recent BFRO report where a woman claims like something grabbed her through her tent, or like fell on her tent, and like she felt herself getting grabbed, and there were like marks on her arms. And in that report, she said she saw like a weird like white light or something like that during the whole scrum. That was like at least on the public BFRO database, that was the first time I seen a report like that. Um, I kind of have like a bit of a weird theory. My theory, my figuring, when people incorporate like, the woo-woo stuff, the supernatural aspects of, that they kind of relate to the, to the Bigfoot phenomena. I think one, two things. Number one, there's probably some type of scientific explanation that, we maybe just haven't figured out, or, realized yet, which doesn't surprise me because, if you look at human history, anything that we can't scientifically or rationally explain that, causes fear or, confusion or whatever, we've always defaulted to it being some type of like, the source being something like supernatural or something like that. Like the bubonic plague, for example, for years we thought it was some type of like, supernatural origin or something like that. We thought meteors were like, deities riding their chariots across the sky, or deities manifesting themselves. The Salem witch hunt, they all thought that was like witchcraft or whatever, but like new evidence is showing, okay, it was most likely some kind of fungus that was just causing people to like hallucinate or trip out or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised, like, if Bigfoot's real, if this is what people are seeing. um I feel like, you could probably chalk up a lot of those details to something like that. The other thing too is, I don't think people, when people say like, the Bigfoot just like disappeared or something like that, I don't think people take into consideration what's physically happening to your brain if you actually have like an encounter or sighting like that. Because I think, yeah, I think you have to think about it like this. If you have like an actual sighting of something like that, especially if it's like a relatively like, up close and personal one, um, think about the emotions that are going, like going through your mind. Think about the emotions the extreme emotions you're going to be experiencing, excitement, fear, shock, things like that. Um, I don't think people realize like what's physically happening to your brain when emotions like that happen. The way like I understand it, it's your adrenal glands, they release hormones, like dopamine, endorphins, and things like that. And when they flood your brain, it does two things. It kind of, they shut down your prefrontal cortex, your frontal lobe. That's a part of your brain. It's kind of like your central command center for your, reasoning, rational thinking, and things like that. That kind of gets shut down. And what happens is a part of your brain, when that happens, a part of your brain called the amygdala that regulates your extreme emotions, that kind of like hops into the driver's seat and pretty much just like, takes control of your mindset and thought process and things like that. So, when like a lot of naysayers and skeptics say like, oh, well, if you saw a Bigfoot, if you saw a Bigfoot, or if you're that close, why didn't you take a picture? Well, that's why, you know, um, like that part of your brain where, that would like drummed up, you to like have that type of reason to do that, it's pretty much shut off. Like, when the amygdala, that part of your brain that regulates your extreme emotions and things like that takes over, it's pretty much putting you in like survival mode, like fight or flight, or I like to say fight, flight, or freeze mode. So I think like those are the two main factors that I at least think could be used to like at the very least partially or mostly explain just like these supernatural or woo, like woo details that you see in a lot of Bigfoot reports.
Yeah, there's a really division in the camp of flesh and blood and all of the phenomena that that some people tend to talk about and experience, and I can respect both of them. And since I haven't had either experience, I kind of just let it be where it lies. But you just have had a wonderful amount of information to share with us, and it sounds like that whole eastern corridor there has quite a bit of activity, and there's some really interesting force to for people to research in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, yeah, like yeah, especially like that, yeah, that northeast corridor, and New England and things like yeah, that whole New England area. Like obviously not a lot of reports come out of that, come out of that area, but at least like publicly. But if you really like do some digging and even just go out there on your own, I think a lot of people be pleasantly surprised with just about what people, if you talk to the right people under the right circumstances, what they have to say and like what you might experience for yourself. I was up actually last month. I have like a little group of Bigfoot, like Bigfoot researchers, like from different parts of like the New England area. We try to get together, a few times a year and just venture out. One of them's a professional filmmaker, other one's, like Bigfoot enthusiast, YouTuber, films all, like likes to film where animals and things like that. But we were in we were camped out in like these logging roads in northern Maine last like this past October, and it was around 6:30. Yeah, yeah, it was around like 6:30ish, like the sun had just set, and we weren't even like again we weren't even like thinking about like Bigfoot or high strangeness or nothing like that. Like we were literally just like getting ready, like setting up to like setting up our camp still, just getting ready to make dinner, and we were like our camp was set up at like the end of this road, and the road kind of like continued, but it was like, super like super overgrown. Like, you couldn't get cars in there. But from that direction, all of a sudden we just hear like this deep, prolonged, like vocalization, howl, what we know, whatever you want to call it. Loud and sustained, like, it was like loud and distinct enough where like we all just like froze and like looked at each other like, what the hell was that? Of course, no one had a recorder going. But there were four of us in total that heard it. Now, what's interesting is one of the people we were with had their dog with him. And after we heard that vocal, his dog was just like on high alert the entire night. Like that dog was just like frozen, had its eyes locked in like one direction, looking out into the tree line out in the darkness. And, the dog's owner's like, as far as like high alertness on like a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 10 for him. Him and like, the other gentleman I was with who've, they spent a lot of time around this dog, never seen him so on edge like this. And the interesting part was he started off staring in one area, but he slowly shifted the direction the dog was staring, slowly shifted like counterclockwise, to like the left throughout the night, almost as if like whatever he may have been looking at was kind of like shifting its position, almost kind of like it was like circling our camp, I guess you could say. But yeah, this happened up in Maine, and it just kind of goes to your point, just about like that little northeast quarter up there. It's not not very populated, a lot of rural, remote areas, heavily forested, like New Ham, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. They're either top three or three of the top four most states with like the highest percentage of forest coverage in the United States. I know the top four are Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and West Virginia. I forget if those three New England ones are the top three, or if they're like one, two, and four or something like that. But
Lots of room for them to hide,
yep.
that's for sure, and live out their lives for sure. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today, Mike, and I'm going to go ahead and end our interview now, but I will let you know when this comes out. And thank you so much for sharing all your stories with us.
Yeah, sounds good, Linda. I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Talk soon.